Hello, my name is Deacon Joe Detwiler, and I'm coming to you from quarantine here at the Bauer household. And I was just ordained a deacon less than a week ago, which is crazy. And so it's cool that all of us, I go to the seminary with about 130 other guys, and it's cool that we're all there for the same reason, but we all have totally unique stories of how we got there. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own story and how I got to the seminary, how I came to discover my vocation. And so, as I go throughout my story, this is my family. I'm the sixth of 7 kids, and 4 of my siblings have kids, and so there's 11 grandchildren with actually number 12 on the way. My brother John had triplets, so there's a lot of small children running around in my house. So even if I might not mention my family by name throughout this whole story, it's just important to know that they're the foundation for everything, because that was the place where I first encountered faith and where I first learned who Jesus was with my family. And so they are the foundation and the basis for my whole story. And this is also my extended family. I'm one of 37 cousins, and there's someone engaged or pregnant at all times, so the family's always growing. But most of us are in St. Louis too, and we're all very close. So my extended family is also a big source of support for me in my journey to the seminary. And so this is my favorite painting ever. This is a picture of the Calling of St. Matthew by Caravaggio back in the Middle Ages. This, we can see, this is Jesus over here, and this is Matthew. Matthew's got his head down, and Jesus calls Matthew even when he's still a tax collector, even when he's still not perfect, even when he's still sinful. And so when Jesus calls us, he doesn't wait until we're perfect, until we have it all figured out. He calls us when we're still not perfect, and we're still trying to figure it out. And so that's definitely the case for me. When God called me, I was certainly didn't have it all figured out. So my sophomore year of high school, I was involved in my youth group, but I randomly ended up on this retreat that I found this opportunity to go on a retreat at the seminary. And at the time, I had no desire to be a priest or to enter the seminary, but for some reason I signed up and I went. And had a great experience, met a lot of great people, especially these 2 guys here. Right here is he's now a priest, Father Zach Povis. He was a seminarian at the time. He was just a very good friend to me and a good mentor, because when you think about the seminary, there's a lot of important questions you got to ask yourself. And when you're a 16-year-old kid, it's a lot to handle. So he kind of helped me to navigate through those waters. And then this guy on the right is Bishop Edward Rice. At the time, he used to be Monsignor Rice, and he used to be head of the Vocations office. So he kind of handled guys coming into the seminary. So I got very close to him throughout my time in high school, because I went on this retreat, and that's really the first place where I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. I think I want to do this in my life. But on this retreat, it all kind of leads up to Saturday night. So on the retreat, we would pray what's called Liturgy of the Hours, which is a prayer that the priest prays. It's the Psalms 5 times a day. It's different times throughout the day. So at the last prayer of the day is night prayer. And so after night prayer, we sing a hymn to Mary. And so at this point in the year, they were singing the Salve Regina, not the Sister Act version, but it was a beautiful song that I'd never heard in my life. And I'd never actually been in a chapel with 30 other young men actually singing. And so that was also one thing that was a little different. But I just remember, it's really hard to kind of identify, but I just remember being very overwhelmed that oh my gosh, something's happening. Something very special is happening. And when I think about that, I was captivated by the thought of being a priest, and I thought, I saw, even though I didn't recognize it at the time, but I saw God's calling me this way. And that call was very subtle, and it came through while we were singing that song Salve Regina, which is the Hail Holy Queen in Latin. So prayer to Mary is where I first discovered my vocation. So I definitely credit Mary a lot to showing me my vocation. And then, so I go throughout high school, I keep going back to the seminary, keep praying more about it and learning more about the seminary. And then as I get towards before my senior year, you start to think about colleges. And so I wanted to go to the seminary after high school. That's what became clear to me, and I wanted to do that. So that was my plan. That was a good plan that I had. But as we always know, the Lord had different plans. So on July 4th, 2010, my younger sister Cecilia and I were at our family farm near Rolla, Missouri, pretty rural area. We were driving back to our house, and we swerved off the road, and these 2-lane highways are pretty steep drop-offs, so we swerved off the road, and we hit a tree at about 40 miles an hour, which is pretty bad. And so this guy, Bill, is the guy who stopped off the road and found us, and he called the ambulance, and he waited there with us till they got there. And so, like, it's funny now, when I hear the story of the Good Samaritan, like, that's a real thing. I had no idea who he was. He stopped off, he called the ambulance, and he stayed with us till the ambulance got there. And so, with a lot of these, you'll find out a lot of these moving pieces fit together. If one of them is missing, I'm not here today. And this is the first one. If Bill's not there, I'm not here. And then this is my sister Cecilia. So I was crushed from the waist up, and she was crushed from the waist down. She broke almost everything below her pelvis. And then I had, I had 3 strokes, pretty major injury to my brain, partially severed right ear, nerve damage to my right eye. I had lost so much blood, and from the strokes, I had a couple aneurysms in my carotid artery, which is also a very bad thing. Cecilia, and I was also unconscious immediately. Cecilia was crushed from the waist down, like I said, so immediately I was out, but she was still awake. And so this Bill who found us saw that I was bleeding on my carotid artery, so I could have bled out at the scene. And so Bill saw this, and she was the only one who had access to my neck. And so he gave her a towel or a t-shirt or something like that, and she held that on my neck to stop the bleeding. And actually, a couple months ago, she asked me to do something, and I said no, and she said, "It's not like I saved your life or anything, Joe." So she still holds it over my head. But yeah, so without her, I am not here today. And so usually the goal with getting people out of cars is 20 minutes. I was told by a fireman this past year. It took them 2 hours to get her out of the car, to pull it apart to get her out, because her legs were caught in the car so bad. So this is what an F-150 usually should look like. Usually. And then this is after they pulled it apart to get her out. And that does not look like a car anymore. But we got out of the car by this team of people. This was the ambulance team. They're all volunteer. They're a unit in a pretty rural area down near St. James. They got us out of the car. When we saw them on this day, they told us like that was one of the worst calls we've ever gotten, because it was hot too. So there weren't all this heavy equipment, and people are passing out left and right, and like took forever to get my sister out. But they got us both out, and then we had to be helicoptered into St. Louis. But before we left, so this is another piece that fits together. This guy he's the local pastor out there, Father Pardee. Unfortunately, he actually passed away a couple of months ago from cancer. But at the time, he was the pastor at the local parish, and my oldest sister Liz went to school at Mizzou, and so he's a Jeff City priest. So he used to be assigned at Mizzou, and so she had randomly invited him to come and hang out with us at our family lake that day for a completely unrelated reason. And so he shows up at our lake to hang out with us, and within 5 minutes he's at the scene of the accident giving my sister and I last rites, which doesn't make sense. So in my time of need in my life, the biggest time of need in my life, the Lord is there for me with the priesthood and the sacraments are there. The Lord wasted no time for bringing this priest into my life at this time. So, and again, these pieces just fit together. So when we get airlifted to Children's Hospital, this is the first day. Obviously, pretty severe. I had like I said, like injuries to the strokes, the brain. I had incredibly severe brain injury, and damage to my lungs, my jaw, my ribs, my right ear, right eye. I received a lot of transfusions of blood. I was put in a medically induced coma for about 5 weeks, induced, and so. But apparently, this is not funny at all. But like you look at this and like, it's no surprise that doctors said like, he's probably not going to make it. And they can't lie to you, and the doctors, they know what they're talking about. So, but also, if by some miracle I make it, there's going to be very little brain activity there. There's not going to be much there, and so that was kind of the expectation for my family in the midst of all this. And my sister was also very badly hurt, but it's hard to speak about her situation because I just don't know it as well. But she was also very badly hurt with her legs. And then, but also in this time of suffering and pain and terrible suffering, I had some very profound experiences of God's love. Obviously, I wasn't awake then, but hearing back about stories about that time really tell me some very profound things about how God loves us and how God loved me through this situation. This is my friend Molly, who at the time we went to high school together. We were very good friends. She was discerning religious life while I was discerning the priesthood at the same time, and we were just very good friends. And so my family had someone staying with each of us 24 hours a day. So she would take shifts with me when I was still in the ICU. And so I guess doctors said it was very important for me to get some kind of physical touch. And so she would come into my room, and for her hour-long shift, she would just hold my hand, which makes no sense to me, because literally 2 weeks beforehand, I was laughing and joking with her, and I'm literally on my deathbed right now. And it would be hard enough to just be in the room. But this is the love only inspired by Jesus, because that love it's not just in the room. That love comes close and holds my hand. So that has been a very powerful image that I go back to all the time. But when she held my hand, she had no expectation of me ever waking up and ever being able to talk to her again and ever being able to really have much brain function ever. So, and actually now it's funny, she's in a religious community in New York, the Sisters of Life. Their special ministry is they help women in crisis pregnancies. So she's a great support for me in my whole journey, especially in my time of need. And also in the ICU, this is he's now a priest, Father Zach Povis. He was a seminarian at the time. He would stay with me in my room in the ICU. And it's funny, like sometimes, especially the state that I was in, no one expected me to survive. And so you think sometimes, like, oh yeah, I'll pray for him, but like, it's probably not going to help anything. And like, he's probably still going to die. And he's probably still not going to make it. But he would come into my ICU room, and he would pray the rosary, and he would pray the Liturgy of the Hours in my room out loud to me. Why? I'm not going to wake up again. But he had hope. So one thing, actually, I didn't figure this story out until like a year ago. But he would come into my room, and he would pray the rosary. And when I was in the ICU, there's some kind of machine hooked up to my lungs to kind of regulate my breathing. And so he said that when he would pray the rosary, the machine would show that the machine would stop working, and I would begin to breathe on my own. So the words of the rosary are literally bringing breath to my lungs. That's not just a nice thought. That's like a literal reality right now. So Mary, the one who first called me, is the one sustaining me through all of this. And so like I said, sometimes in these kind of situations, prayer can seem like kind of a shot in the dark, like it's not really going to help anything. But these are a lot of my friends at youth group. I was involved in the Incarnate Word youth group in West County in high school. And even though all the news that they were hearing was all like bad, and it's not looking like I was going to make it, they continued to pray for me, and they were faithful and persevering in their prayer for me. So, and I think a lot of my story does not make sense, like you'll learn. And I credit a lot of that to the power of prayer. So these are definitely a big support for me. And so one of the things that they did, it's great, we have the saints in the church, and so they would pray a lot for the intercession of St. Jude, who is the patron saint of lost causes. Who, when you have a lost cause, like obviously when you have lost cause, you ask him for help. And so at that time, I was the lost cause. There was no one who thought that I would make it. And so they started praying for the intercession of St. Jude. And he comes back later. So, and then so I get out of the ICU, and even though I get out of the ICU and that's progress, there's still not much there. And so this video kind of shows what it was like when I first got out of the ICU.
Okay. So you're moving your hand. Good. Alright, we're going to hold up 2 fingers, okay? Put your hand up. Show me 2 fingers, Joe. 2. 2. Go like this. Good job! You did it! Good job!
Yeah, so that's like very sobering. And it's also crazy to think about the fact that I was able to hold up 2 fingers when she asked me to. Like, that was a huge deal. A huge deal that I'm able to respond at all to anything. So that's kind of shows how bad things were in those early days. And then this, I was in physical therapy because like you go from being a senior in high school and then you go back to preschool. Cones, walking, tying your shoes, swallowing, and like preschool's really hard. A lot of this, it's kind of fuzzy. I don't really remember this. So my eyes are open and I'm kind of up, but I have no memory of this. And I'm still unresponsive because I have what's called a trach tube in my throat for my breathing. And my jaw's wired shut as well to make sure my jaw could heal correctly. So, but with the brain, because the injury to my brain was so severe, like my brain knows how to stack cones, but my brain couldn't send the signals down to the rest of my body to actually do it. So your brain has to make new pathways to relay all that information. And so that's a lot of what I worked on in physical therapy. But for a lot of that time, there was not a whole lot there. Until on day 74, like I said earlier, I had a trach tube in my throat. And so the day they took the tube out of my throat, previous to the surgery, the doctors told my parents, all right, like, best case scenario, he's going to be making sounds in like a few months. We're going to start with sounds, and then words, and then sentences, but conversation's a long way away. And I heard from my therapist later, realistically, it probably was never going to happen again because the injury to my brain was so severe, and for 74 days, I'm not showing hardly any kind of response to anything. And so this guy, he was a scholastic at the time, he's now a priest, Father Ronnie Detwiler was in my room. He was praying Liturgy of the Hours, like we said, was big in my story earlier. And so he was praying evening prayer. And part of that prayer is you pray the Glory Be a lot. So he was praying out loud, which again wouldn't make sense to someone who's on their deathbed. But he did not expect this at all, but he was praying. He said, Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. And then as I was laying there in my bed, I whispered, as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen. And this, if like I'm able to not only speak, but in sentences, and also give the right responses at the right time, like all of this is totally unforeseen. And this would have been amazing if it would have happened like a couple months later, a couple weeks later, like that would have been totally unforeseen. The reality is that this happened 6 hours after the surgery, after the tube came out of my throat, which, like all throughout my story, I mean, like Father Pardee coming to anoint me at the scene, like this, like when the Lord comes to our help, he comes in abundance. He comes with more than we could ever ask for. And so no one could have ever foreseen this. And so, but also like I was with a priest and we were praying the prayer that the priest prays, Liturgy of the Hours. So it's very, little hint there. Yeah, so this was a big turning point in my recovery because usually brain injury recovery is very slow and not really happening that well. So, but from this point on, therapy began to progress a lot, and I began to recover a lot. This guy, this is my brain surgeon. So the first night that I was in the hospital, they knew that I had a traumatic brain injury. So, and it's actually a particularly bad one. So they put me in this study, like, what is it about kids that have TBI how did they get better? What is it? And so for this study, kind of unrelated to my recovery, I took an MRI, kind of a scan of my brain. And so, but they caught on this MRI that I had what's called hydrocephalus, which is like brain swelling. Your spinal fluid kind of freaks out after a trauma. And so my brain pressure was like off the charts. And that would have caused major issues down the line. But if it wasn't for this random MRI that I was randomly in, they would have never caught it. Because I was showing... Thanks. I was showing none of the normal signs. I was not vomiting, no nausea, no headaches. They would have never thought that this was the case if it wasn't for this random MRI. And so from this MRI, I had brain surgery. And so he was my surgeon. So, and then these pictures were taken on the last day I was in the hospital after 117 days of being in the hospital from July 4th to October 28th, and 5 weeks in the coma, and then the rest on the regular floor. These are a lot of my nurses and therapists and other doctors here. They did some amazing things with my physical health, but I think the worst thing that I suffered from was the emotional damage. Like, you're 18 years old, how do you deal with this? But they really helped me to receive spiritual healing when I was in the hospital. And so I'm really grateful for all these people, and I think of them all the time. I have pictures of them all over my room. And like I said earlier, like you would think, like I'm not sure if I said this earlier or whatever, but like you would think that a situation like this, you want to, all right, I'm done with this. I'm never going to think about this again. But as you'll see, I go back, and I intentionally go back and I think about this. This experience continues to give me life, even today, 10 years later. So these are some of my nurses and some of my therapists and some of my doctors on my last day. And like I said earlier, my last day was October 28th. And it's great. In the church, we have saints, and saints have feast days. And I'm not sure if you know this, but the feast day that's celebrated on October 28th is the feast day of Saint Simon and Jude, which, again, crazy. And one of my big motivations to work hard in the hospital is because I just wanted to go to prom. That was my big motivating thing. And so on prom day, I went back up to the hospital in my tux and with flowers, and I got pictures with a lot of my nurses. So going back and because it's life-giving for me, but also it's life-giving for them. And so the Lord uses this terrible situation to continue to help people today. So I went back that one day. Then ever since I've been in the seminary, I mean, they love it when I come back and see them, because a lot of times kids get out of there, then they never see them again. So I've gone back up in my clerics or in my cassock or whatever, just to see people that I'm not only like alive, but like I'm doing something like very like crazy with my, like not crazy, but awesome with my life, and I'm studying philosophy and theology and these very deep things, and like I'm able to hang with it. So, but all because of their help. If I didn't have their help, I would not have been here. So after I got out of the hospital, I had to continue going to therapy. So I went to a therapy gym where I was in a day treatment program where I was the only patient under like 65 years old. It was a lot of fun. Played a lot of games. I wasn't very good at those games. But these are some of my therapists there. So here we have Stephanie, who is my physical therapist, who's continued to help me because with brain injury, just helping me to learn balance and muscle memory. And then my occupational therapist, how to do things that helped me throughout my day. And then this lady, Teresa, she was a huge help for me because she was my speech therapist. And so with the brain injury, like in the hospital, speech therapy consisted of like swallowing and like speaking, like very basic things. But when I got to therapy with her, it was more like how to be a student again, because I had to learn how to cope with things like, all right, I have memory loss. I have thought organization issues. I get confused when I'm told a lot of things and I can't write anything down. So school, there's many things that make school just harder now. And so she was really very patient with me, because I can imagine when I first got in there, it was probably pretty bad. And I'm sure just looking at my medical chart, it's hard to have a positive outlook. But she was really very patient with me and very faithful to me. And so I'm very grateful for the help that she gave me. And I credit her with a huge part of like why I'm able to handle all my academic work that I have at the seminary. So I think about her often, very often. And then after I was discharged from this program, I went back, I was back part-time at DeSmet High School in West County. But as part of my senior year, I got to lead a Kairos retreat, which was really awesome. And it was actually the first kind of indication that where I told this story basically. Talked about how God worked through this story. And that was kind of the first time where I saw that, all right, telling my story, like I can use this to help people and to lead people to a deeper faith in God. So that was a very, very positive thing for me, that I'm not only able to, I've been able to come this far, but also I can use my experience to help other people, which is very, very cool for me. And also when I was in the hospital, I wore an eye patch for about 2 months because I had nerve damage in my right eye. So when I ended up graduating high school that year, my graduation party was pirate themed, which was a lot of fun. We had little wooden boxes with chocolate coins in them, and like everyone was dressed like pirates. It was great. But yeah, so then after I graduated high school, I wanted to go to the seminary, but that just wasn't possible. So I went to I went to Merrimack Community College for a year and continued to recover. And after high school, I felt like all my friends are moving away. This is going to be terrible. Like, woe is me, all these things. But actually, that year ended up being one of the best years of my life. It was awesome. I grew a lot in that year. I was able to, like, the Lord was able to help me to go outside of myself and meet people and have new experiences and grow as a person. And so even though I was really dreading that year, I'm really thankful for that year for many reasons. These are some of the people that I got to know. This is a great retreat that I went on at the Umsel Newman Center. And then this is a picture on the right. It's me and my friend Sophia, who, because I wasn't driving that year, she was my chauffeur that whole year. But we got very close, and she was just been a really good friend to me. And I didn't know her that well before, and so I'm very, if anything, like that year I was able to grow closer to her, which was a great friendship and very life-giving relationship. So I'm very grateful for how God worked throughout that whole year with all the friends that I made. And then, oh boy, this is a picture of from West Side Story. This is Tony and Maria. Tony is like captivated by Maria, and like he's in love with her, and he's singing a song to her. And don't worry, I'm not gonna sing. But during this year, when I was at Merrimack, I kept in touch with one of my friends from high school, and over Christmas break, then for a couple months after whenever she was home, we ended up going on a couple dates, and like it was interesting because like she's beautiful, she's holy, she's like, oh, she's amazing. Like everything I would ever want in a wife is like here, right here. And in a certain sense, it's like, really, Jesus, I want to go to the seminary, but you give me this. So in a sense, it was kind of confusing, but actually ended up being very helpful because it became clear to me that sometimes in discernment, you have to be aware of how God's working, and God is so subtle. It's so annoying. But if I have this amazing woman in the ideal situation for a wife right in front of my eyes, but I still want to go to the seminary, like, all right, like, this is something I have to pursue then, because that's not normal. And so that kind of affirmed to me, like, all right, yes, like, this is where you need to go. And so this is the first time at priest ordinations each May, which would be me next year. Oh, gosh. The new seminarians get all dressed up as seminarians, because like this is like my first time officially as a seminarian after I was accepted. And so this was these two pictures. There's less than a 2-year difference between these two pictures. And it's funny, you think like, all right, God searches the whole world for who he wants to be in the seminary, and he's like, yeah, like I want that guy. Like, really? Are you crazy? But if God wants you to be here, he can get you through here. And so I'm very grateful for how God worked with me through all this process. But these two pictures being side by side is just like, I'm still overwhelmed by that. And I've continued to have a lot of great experiences while being in seminary. This is in college seminary. I got to Bishop Bryce, like I said earlier, got to serve with him. And then this was one of my friends. He's a priest now, and so I got to serve his first mass. And he actually stayed a lot of time with me when I was in the hospital. So it was just very special for me to be there for him and be there in the role that I was as a seminarian. Like when no one foresaw that at all. And so that's just like crazy. And then as I went through college, we all get a degree in philosophy, which is pretty dense and pretty hard for someone without a brain injury. But the Lord totally worked with me, and I'm very thankful because if I didn't go through therapy, I wouldn't know how to ask for help quite like I do now. And so I needed help to get through the rigors of philosophy. And because of the strategies that I learned with Teresa, I'm a far better student now. And so like Teresa's still a big part of my life since I'm still a student. And so, but I did very well in philosophy and all my schoolwork, and I continued to keep those people in my mind and my heart. And actually, when I graduated, this is my night of graduation. This guy on the left, the Dr. Jose Pineda, he was my neurologist in the ICU. And then this woman on the right, she was my physical therapist on the 12th floor. She is the one who taught me how to walk again, taught me how to tie my shoes again, and worked with me at the worst time. So she's the one who's stacking cones with me. And also one of the most life-giving friendships that I have from the hospital. So you might have recognized her. She was in that first picture of me in the ICU. This was the woman who was taking care of me in the ICU. And so this over here is us. So when I turned 21, I discovered karaoke bars. And so this is us at a karaoke bar. And then on the right, that's us at lunch, just hanging out with her and her husband. And then in the middle, she had a little boy, James. And so James was actually born very prematurely. And so he was in the hospital at Glennon. And so she texted me asking me for prayers because we still keep in touch pretty closely. And so she said, hey, my son James is in the hospital. He's in the NICU. Only certain people can come visit him. But I just want to tell you that you're on the list to visit him, so you can come visit him if you want. And so the woman who took care of me when I was a patient in the ICU, now I'm the one visiting her when her son's in the ICU. It's just like how the Lord, just like everything totally just like it's turned upside down. And this relationship is still very life-giving for me. And she'll come back again, so don't worry. And then this is my sister. So this is my college graduation. And then this is her college graduation. We have a bond that words can't even describe right now. She's still mean to me sometimes. She still bosses me around. But our love for each other has grown very deeply, and we're still a great sense of support for each other. And I know, especially when we were in the hospital, we were rooting for each other. And so the way that this relationship grew was also a way that God was showing me His great love for me. And when I go to a new doctor's office, filling out medical health history forms is a nightmare because it's a very long list. And so instead of filling out the list every time, I just basically wrote down everything, and then I just print off this list and I just hand this to the doctor. So when I go to a new doctor's office, this is the list that I give them. It's quite an extensive list. And it's not like little things. It's like coma, strokes, brain injury. Like it's pretty serious things too. So this is just a new normal that obviously took some adjusting to adjust to. But the Lord has just totally overwhelmed me with grace and has overcome any of the trials or obstacles that I've had that have been in the way. And actually, so like I said earlier, I was ordained as transitional deacon like a week ago, which is crazy. And so because of the whole virus thing, we were ordained in an empty cathedral. The cathedral can seat 1,400 people, and there was 32 people in the cathedral that day. And I think about that. I think about when the Lord first called me, was in that quiet chapel to that song to Mary. The Lord called me in humility in a very humble, subtle way. And it would make total sense that I get ordained. God chooses the humble option for my ordination. And so, and we wore masks and everything like that. So I'm still, a few days after that, so I'm still soaking it in. But yeah, words cannot describe. And then this is when the ordination happens, when the bishop lays his hands on my head. And then this is when I promise obedience to him. I'm still like, I don't even know how any of this is possible. When you look back at how I got here, like, no one ever foresaw this, ever. And so, just the fact that this was able to happen is just like rocking my world right now. But I'm just like so grateful that God has called me to this life. And so he's using my own experience of suffering and pain and trial, and he's using that to further his glory, which is just like, because he doesn't need me in the first place. He's God. He can do whatever he wants with or without me. But he chooses to use me and he chooses to use my weakness and my suffering to further his glory. And then this is one of the coolest pictures. So as part of the ordination, we lay down our lives at ordination. So part of that, it's not like, it's a spiritual reality, but also like we literally lay down our bodies. This is the literal reality that we're laying down. So I think there's me. You can see my bald spot right there. I have a bald spot from the coma. But yeah, just think about that. Like, that is crazy. That is crazy that the Lord can bring me to this. And it's just like, it's crazy. That's all I can say. This is from the side, all of us laying down. And I just remember hitting my nose hitting the marble. Like, I was just so overwhelmed. Like, really? Is this actually happening? Like, how? That's like, I'm so overwhelmed with that right now. How is this possible? But it is, in some miraculous way. And then this is after the ordination of my parents. Don't look like me at all, but they're my parents. And then actually, because of the virus, the first homily was not able to be public, but I was invited a whole bunch of my family and friends to wait out in the parking lot. And so when I got out after the homily, I walked out and everyone honked and whatever. And it was great. But then I used a big megaphone and I said a blessing over everyone. And then I went around and I sprinkled holy water around on everyone in their cars, which is really cool. So even in all of this chaos that we're going through right now, like the hand of the Lord is still at work, big time, in my life at least, but in everyone's life. And also, there's also one very special thing that happened for me on that day. So this was Sunday, but on Saturday at the ordination, I invited people to come outside of my parish to park in the parking lot. But actually, the day before on Saturday, I didn't tell anyone to come, but I had a friend there who was the only fan who had her car decked out in poster board, who was waiting in the parking lot for me right after I walked out. And it was my friend Rita, who we took a socially distanced picture. But Rita was the same one who took care of me in the ICU. This kind of friendship is like, who would ever dream up this kind of relationship? And I've kept in touch with her, and it's been a very life-giving relationship for me. And so the Lord again shows me again that He wants to use this experience to give me life and to continue to call me deeper into His love. And so I'm very grateful for, I know it was kind of long, and I apologize for that. There's just a lot of details that fit together, and I hope all of you know that the Lord calls each and every one of us, and He calls each and every one of us in a very unique and particular way to each one of us. And He calls each one of us to follow His specific plan. And so one part of that I know when you're in high school and you think about, do I want to be a priest? That's a pretty big question. And in that process, you have to ask a lot of really big questions and a lot of scary questions as well. So it's very easy to get freaked out at that. But I would just want to encourage you that the Lord is very gentle and patient. Because if He would have told me all of this story 9 years ago, I don't know if I would have said yes. But He told me a little bit, and then I got curious, and I kept coming back, and He kept revealing His plan gently and patiently over time to me. And even when it looked like His plan was not a possibility, even if I would have survived that, there was not much likelihood of me having much brain activity at all. But the Lord came to my aid, and He didn't just wait to do that. He came to my aid at the scene with the priest. And so the priesthood and Mary are all throughout my vocation story. But I would just encourage all of you to just be aware of how God's working in your life. And it's so important to ask the question, what God wants from me. Because I promise you that what He has in plan for you is far greater than what you have. Because I know would have never had any of this. But I think so small. And the Lord had so much greater plans for me. And I didn't have those plans because I could have never thought up anything this amazing. I could have never made all these moving pieces fit together. And so the Lord wants He wants to take us on an adventure. And He wants us to cooperate with Him. And He wants to show us His love in abundance. And so I would urge all of you to please ask the Lord, what do you want from me in prayer? And to wait for His response. That's it.